The most challenging part about the building was how to keep it stabilized so it wasn't going to fall down. Everything, all the guts were removed, all the siding was removed. It looked like it was in a state of collapse.
This derelict structure contains a mystery. Hidden within its decaying walls are clues to times past and lives forgotten. What is considered fact is myth. And what is myth? Reality. What follows is a detective story.
I remember pulling in and looking at that, and I'm thinking, I'm in the wrong spot here. There's nobody can fix this place.
Why should anyone care about an old home? Like everything in this world, they have their time in the sun before eventually outliving their usefulness. With the peeling of their paint, the leaking of their roofs, and the slow decay of their foundational support, they face a seemingly necessary but most cruel fate. Cold silence mocks rooms where once there was life. Stout sheltering walls crumble and collapse. Only crawling spiders remain. It is only hours, or at the most days, before they are claimed by the bulldozer, wrecking ball, or the incendiary's torch. Such was the case with this structure. During the course of our program, we will share a story of the tireless detectives who sought out every clue to spare it from destruction. Join them as they recount their investigation. Come along and discover why old buildings do matter.
Back in 1993, my late husband Tom and I were living in Switzerland County, Indiana. I was president of the County Historical Society. And there was an old building about 2 miles west of Vevay that the property owners considered an eyesore. They wanted to give it to the fire department as a burn exercise. I had been asked to take a look at it. The rumor was that it was an old log house hiding under modern siding. So one afternoon, Tom and I went over to the property, and since it was slated for destruction, we didn't think there would be any problem if we began hacking into the walls to see if we could find those logs. So we began chipping away. To our surprise, though, there weren't any logs, but what we kept finding just seemed so out of place. Old homes are detective stories. The clues to who they really are lead you on many interesting journeys. Some are dead ends, but some eventually lead you to the truth. After spending several hours on the site, walking the property, looking at the old barn and shed, we became even more curious. Was this building trying to tell us something? What was the mystery hidden behind this soon-to-be-burned derelict structure? Whether we were aware of the fact or not, we were about to become the lead detectives in finding out what this place was. Or I should say, once was. Our first stop was to look in records and deeds. The clues we uncovered in the Switzerland County Courthouse told us that the first property owner was a French-Swiss immigrant named Louis J. Aubussier. He bought the 319 acres in 1805 that our soon-to-be-burned house sat on. We also learned that he was one of the Swiss winemakers which originally settled the area. But Aubussier wasn't the only name associated with the decaying structure. 2 others by the name of Jacob Weaver and Charlotte Weaver also turned up. Before I go any further, I should clearly state, though my married name is Weaver, Tom and I were no relation to these 2 early property owners. Every good detective avails themselves of an informant. We did the same. The name of ours was the Internet. Searching online, this informant told us that the Indiana Historical Society held a collection of letters written by Jacob. Traveling up to Indianapolis and sitting in the library, I began to read Jacob's letters. They gave a fascinating view of life in early Indiana, but little information about the house itself. So what now? Had I merely stumbled upon another dead end? A good detective knows when to trust his informant. A little more digging showed us that Jacob Weaver and his wife Charlotte Golay Weaver, along with their children, had come from Ulster County, New York in 1813 to settle in the area. Jacob Weaver had the house built. The letters proved beyond a doubt that this house had a significant history that was important to the county. It did not deserve to be burned. Meanwhile, the barn that was with the house was burned. After negotiating with the owners, we formed a nonprofit organization and bought the property. We chose the name the Swiss gave to Indian Creek, Venoge. We called it the Museum of the Venoge, or in French, Musée de Venoge. Looking at photos of other early Switzerland County homes like these led us to believe that the house was probably built by people used to building in the French colonial tradition. Why were they here, in Indiana? It only began to make sense after we learned that in 1796, Jean-Jacques Dufour, the first of the French-Swiss winemakers, he had traveled to the French-settled areas of the United States. Perhaps he spread the word that work was to be had in his colony of New Switzerland. We came to understand that the house was a timber frame with brick nogging in between the timbers. It was common in French-built homes of the period. The distinctive shape of the original house was hidden with the later additions of 3 rooms. Our first job was to remove those additions and get a good wood-shake roof on it. That happened in 2005. All this book knowledge was great, but it didn't do anything for us if we couldn't restore the structure. We needed a contractor with a love for doing historical preservation right. We found such a person in John Marsh.
I originally got involved at Venoge, having been recommended to Donna Weaver by Sonny Ash, and I had worked on the Vincennes Territorial Capitol building, which was pretty much the same construction as the Venoge house. It had noggin and post and beam construction. Well, I do. I love the challenge of the puzzle and trying to put it back together as it was constructed. I mean, that's the most enjoyable part of it, and solving the problems. The one thing that we didn't know about this building was where the stairway was located.
When we first saw the house, the stair was inside a narrow hall and crossed a window to the rear of the house. That certainly was not original. Some wood in the hallway was cypress, and that wasn't common in the county until about 1850, so that gave us a rough date as to when the stair was put across the window.
The stairway that was in the house couldn't have been the original. It had been, some of the ceiling joists had been cut through, and we were trying to find the location. And we happened to stumble upon it from looking at the outside off the porch, where there was an opening that had been framed back in and plaster and lapped over on the inside.
In some French-built houses, like this one in Louisiana, the entrance to the second floor is sometimes on the porch. We continued searching for clues.
Once we got into it, we actually found mortises where a newel post had been, and also a mortise on one of the side vertical uprights that was mortise that would have had a railing attached to it.
That pretty well cinched it. The stair to the second floor had an entrance off the porch. The next big question, where was the hearth and fireplace? When we first saw the house, there was no hearth and no chimney. Luck was with us, though, when we found the original mantel in a shed behind the house.
And once we removed the 2 layers of flooring, you could actually see where the original hearth was and how it had been trimmed out. And the old stone foundation was beneath that, and you could see it was all very clear that was the location, and it kind of established the size of the firebox, the height, poured new foundation for the fireplace, laid up block, and reconstructed the entire chimney from the firebox all the way up through the chimney that went through the roof.
Meanwhile, the floor had been taken up and the usable flooring set aside to be reinstalled later. The beams that supported the second floor had deteriorated. The first floor dipped significantly to the north. The beams were reinforced and the floor leveled. The ceiling was raised 3 inches using a beam and floor jack. Investigation revealed that a window on the south side had once been a door, and the door in the rear that led to a kitchen addition had once been a window. The windows remaining in the house had deteriorated so badly they could not be used. We had one complete original that still had its trim. It was a 6/6 pane configuration. Many of the modern windows in the house were 1/1s or 2/2s. This meant that we had to replace all of those with 6/6s. We found original siding on the porch where it had been covered by a ceiling. That was reproduced for the rest of the house. The siding was given a coat of simple whitewash. Was the woodwork painted? How do you find out? Well, first you contact a historical paint consultant. Matt Mosca is nationally recognized in the field of historic paint research and restoration. He looked very closely, took samples, and cut thin sections to look at under a microscope. He found that the mantel was first painted a mixture of lead white and lamp black, making a gray. The woodwork on the second floor was not painted until the late 19th century, long after the weavers had moved. Darren Rubino, a dendrochronologist from Hanover College in nearby Jefferson County, Indiana, investigated the kinds of woods used in the house. He was able to tell us that some of the trees for the house were cut down in 1828. That echoes the date we found in Jacob's letters. Jacob began buying the property in 1814, but didn't have the house built until 1828. Underneath plaster walls are wood strips called lath. The lath we saw in the house was unusual, so more detective work was needed. We needed a plasterer who knew the traditional methods. That man was Terry Woolenweber.
I believe I got called in to Venoge by John Marsh. I had worked for him before and done some ceiling medallions, some cornice repair, stuff like that for him in some older houses. And he asked me if I'd be interested in coming down and look at Venoge. And of course, I'm always interested in looking at old buildings.
Turns out what we had was fairly rare. A newly cut board is hacked with an axe from each end and then pulled apart like an accordion and then nailed to the studs. It is called, appropriately enough, accordion lath.
This accordion lath was one of a kind, that I've seen in all the years I've worked. When we first got started on this project, John Marsh and I were up there, and he showed me the accordion lath, and it's by far the longest piece of accordion lath, and I haven't seen many pieces of it, many examples. It had to be 16 foot long. I believe we measured it. It was almost 16 feet. Donna wanted to make sure, because she wanted to use this as a teaching tool as well, is from the backside was going to be open. So you could see the plaster keys, how they lap down over the wood lath. And a lot of people have never seen that, especially kids. They see the front of the room, the finished wall. We tried to do the best we could to match it so it looked like what was there. Well, what we did on the first floor there at Venoge, everything was pretty well exposed. The brick in between the timbers that were uprights. When it was first built, they went right over the brick. They went right over the wood. They made keys into the wood with an axe or a hatchet to help the plaster key in. The brick would have, more than likely, they plastered it soon after they laid the brick, so there was still moisture in the wall. If not, they'd have used a brush or water to wet the brick. I use metal lath it's just a little extra. You can't see it, but it just gives you a little extra way to hold and keep it from having so many stress cracks, deep stress cracks. In a building like that, of course, with a frame building, all the change of temperatures we have here in Indiana, it's going to move.
The clues had all come together. It was a journey of 16 years from the beginning of our organization until we were able to open the house to the public. That house, which came so close to being burned, was now restored and listed on the National Register of Historic Places. It became our goal to learn how an early Indiana family of 9 lived in this 3-room home we put back together. Because of Jacob Weaver's letters, we now have a better understanding of this aspect of the story. And because of the expertise of the many people who worked on the house, we can now step back into it and back in time to early 19th century Indiana. On April 20th, 1828, Jacob Weaver wrote that he and his family were preparing to leave where they currently lived and go on a small place I had wrote you about before. After all we did to save their home and tell its story, we hope that if they walked in through that front door right now, they would feel welcome and at home.
Why should anyone care about an old house? The answer is quite simple. Old houses are the story of people. Not only the people who built them, but the people who once lived in them. History can have no value if the past is not relatable to the present.
You need to let your mind open to new things that maybe you didn't know, and you always learn something. But to have that opportunity to work on that building and try to make it a teaching tool or help make it a teaching tool for our younger generation, it's gratifying.